this right here is just going to be a basic section that kind of explains some of the different maths you'll see. Compensation, commissions, fees, percentages, valuation, market sales price and yields, percentages, loan to value ratios, percentages, measurements. It's going to be area calculations, right? Length times width equals, area, and then of course cubic volume and things of that nature. So that's multiplication and division. Points, percentages, property management, investment, percentages, and then tax and other prorations, some rates, some percentages. So it all really comes into play with a similar kind of feel, okay? It's basically the same math concept rehashed time and time again with different numbers, different, kind of plugins. So let's start with just, what is this, page 2, taxes, okay? I'm going to show you how to work this out and give you the answers here. So in this scenario, we're looking at tax rate. So tax rates, we're going to teach a little more in class. North Carolina uses a per 100 tax rate. And so that is what will be what you deal with if you get your license in the state of North Carolina. If you're in other states, some other states will use a per 100, or they will use that mill rate that I mentioned just a little bit ago. So let me articulate this. And this is why, if you listen to me, you don't need formulas. A per 100 rate is how much you owe the tax assessor per $100 of assessed value. Now, assessed value is how we reference it in North Carolina. Sometimes there is things that come into play like equalization factors based on a sales price or something of that nature. So when we say, like in this first example, let me get my pen out here, 75 per 100. That's exactly what it sounds like. You owe the tax assessor 75 cents per $100 worth of assessed value. Now, there is more than one way to tackle this, and I'm going to show you a couple and then, of course, give you the answers. So in this scenario, we're saying 75 cents per 100, and the assessed value is 130,000. What you can also then do is take this 130,000 and say, okay, well, how many times does 100 go into 130,000? Well, when you say how many times does something go into, that's division. So if you take your calculator here and you say, okay, $130,000 of assessed value, how many times does 100 go into that? You're dividing by 100, it goes into it 1,300 times. So in other words, you owe the tax assessor 75 cents per $100 worth of value, and there is 1,300 times that 100 goes into it. Well, times is multiplication. So you owe them 75 cents 1,300 times. Multiply it out. 1,300 times 75 cents. The tax bill would be $975. Okay, I'm going to write that here. Now, let me show you another way. When you're dealing with this per 100 rate, if you were to take your calculator, let me pull it back up here, and you were looking at 100 in a calculator, and you were to divide 100 by itself, you're left with 1. Okay, 100 goes into itself one time. So what that means is, if you were to take this 75 cents per 100 and divide it by 100, you have converted this to a per dollar rate. So now, if we're looking at this, we could say, okay, well, we owe the tax assessor 75 cents per 100. Or we could say we owe the tax assessor 0.0075 cents per dollar. And now that we've converted to a per dollar rate, we could just multiply that by our assessed value of 130,000. And you get the exact same. The reason why it's important to understand this is because you may be asked to convert a per 100 rate to a per dollar rate, or a per 100 to a mill rate. Now, folks, I keep saying mill rate. Now, that's going to come up later, but just so you understand, mill rate is typically expressed as M-I-L-L-S, mills. So if I said 17 mills or 13 mills or something like that, okay? Well, all a mill rate is a per 1,000 rate. So when we're looking at this problem right here, you owe this much per 100. We could easily, and some municipalities and some states use this mill rate, say you owe this much per $1,000 in assessed value. Well, folks, let me show you this. if you look at a calculator, yet again, and we say, okay, well, if we're looking at 100, we can divide 100 by itself to get 1, which would convert it to a per dollar rate. Or we can say, okay, what would we have to do to 100 in a calculator to make it 1,000? And the answer is multiply by 10. So if you take a per 100 rate and multiply it by 10, you have converted it to a per 1,000 rate. So in this example, our per 100 rate is 75 cents. If you take your 75 cents and multiply it by 10, now I've converted this to a mill rate. Okay, so this is the same, right here, is the same as saying 7.5 mils. It's not a great mils, but you get the idea. And so watch what happens on the calculator. If I said, okay, how many times does 1,000 go into this assessed value? So 130,000 divided by 1,000 goes into 130 times. So we would owe $7.50 130 times, or 130 times $7.50. It's the same. Don't let this stuff confuse you. It should be pretty easy to convert it from a per 100 rate to a mill rate to a per dollar rate and back. So same thing, if I'm looking at 7.5 mils, if you think about 1,000 in a calculator, 1,000 on a calculator divided by itself would be 1. And so if you're looking at a mill rate of 7.5 mils and you divide it by 1,000, you have now converted that mill rate back to a per dollar rate. All I'm doing is converting things around. Don't let this confuse you. Now, we're going to talk more about this in any curriculum, so hopefully if you're watching this video, you've already kind of heard this. I want to make an important, oops, I didn't mean to close my calculator out. I want to make an important statement here about these calculations, okay? When we're dealing with real property taxes, you always pay county taxes, okay? There is not a single person who lives anywhere that is not living in a county, but not everybody lives in the city limits. So when you're dealing with questions that say such and such lives in the city limits of this state in this, or I'm sorry, of this city in this county, you would have to pay both the city tax rate and the county tax rate. If you live outside of the city limits, you are always going to pay the county tax rate, okay, bar none. So let me try to zoom out here. Let's see if it likes this. Okay, cool. So I can leave this here. And so now if we look at number 2, and I'll erase this answer here because technically mills isn't part of this problem. I just wanted you to work that out. So the answer for this one is $975. So when we look at the second one right here, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. What is the annual tax bill for a property in the city assessed at $245,000, and the tax rate is 45 cents per 100 in the city and 35 cents per 100 for the county? Now this is exactly what I was just talking about. You've got to read these questions carefully. So in the city, so that means it is located in the city limits, and so you're going to use both. The easiest thing to do is just go ahead and add these together because you've always got the county rate, and if it's located in the city limits, it's going to have the city rate as well. So, bring my calculator back up. We've got 35 cents for the city, is that right? For the county. 35 cents for the county and 45 cents for the city for a total of 80 cents per 100. And so that is my tax value, or my tax rate, should I say, 80 cents per 100. That's kind of hard to read. Since I'm zoomed in so much, it's a lot bigger kind of cursor for me. There we go. So 80 cents per 100, and I told you there's a couple different ways you could do this. You could say, okay, well, how many times does 100 go into the assessed value? You could also say, 80 cents divided by 100 gives you a per dollar rate, and then multiply that by the whole assessed value. Whatever you're more comfortable with. I typically recommend converting it to a per dollar rate. And the reason why, when you're reverse engineering these problems, when you don't have a rate, if it's already converted, you'll never have to worry about where you end up. And I'll give you some examples of this in a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of move my calculator over here. I'm going to say, okay, 80 cents per 100 divided by 100 gives us a per dollar rate of 0.008. So in other words, we owe you that much. I mean, that's smaller than a penny, but we still owe you that much per dollar of assessed value. Well, our assessed value, $245,000. And so take your 0.008 times our 245,000 gives us a tax bill of $1,960. It's that simple. Now I'll erase these extra little added pieces here so we can see the answer in one pretty light in a moment. Let's keep going. A property, let me scroll here and make sure we're good. Property is assessed at $64,410. The county tax rate is 8.9 mils per dollar. What would be the amount of the annual tax bill? And then further, what would be the monthly payments to the escrow account? Now, escrow accounts we talk about in the financing section. It is money that goes into an account for the bank to hold to pay your tax bill later when it's due. I'm not going to get into that detail at this point. So basically, we're just saying what's the annual tax bill and then divided by 12 to figure out how much we would be responsible for paying each month. Now, here's that mill rate. Remember, I told you, mills is a per 1,000. That's all it means. So when we say 8.9 mils, this means that we are going to be paying $8.90 per $1,000 worth of assessed value. So when we look at this, there's just the county rate. There's no city. The property is assessed at $64,410. A couple different ways you can do this, but I'm going to do it the way that I like to because it keeps it kind of clean and simple. So I'm going to say 8.9 mils. And remember, think about what you'd have to do in a calculator to 1,000 to convert it to a dollar. Divides into itself 1,000, divides into 1,000 one time. So take your mill rate, which is per 1,000, divided by 1,000, and you've now converted it to a per dollar rate. And so we owe 0.0089 cents per dollar of assessed value. Our assessed value is this 64,410. So times 64,410 gives us a tax bill, annual tax bill of $573.25. But that's not the answer because we want to know the monthly. So the monthly is divided by 12 because there are 12 months in a year. So we are going to be dealing with, and actually let me put this in black so it's consistent. Annual 573.25. Monthly was what? $47.77. There you go. Let's get rid of this jazz right here. Let's look at the next one. House with a market value of $50,000 is located in a city where the assessed value is 60% of the market value. The county rate is $1.45 per 100, and the city rate is $2 per 100. What is the annual property tax on the house? So this is an interesting one because we are dealing with that equalization factor. Now it says $50,000 is the market value, and the assessed value is 60% of the market value. So what this is really getting into is you're not paying taxes on this number. You're paying taxes on 60% of that number. It's called an equalization factor. It could be more, it could be less. Don't overthink it. Just do what the math says. And so if you take your calculator and you say, okay, well, the market value is $50,000, but we're only getting charged taxes on 60% of that. Remember, 60% is cents. So times 60 cents or 0.6 for the percentage. And so we're getting charged taxes on $30,000. And then we've got the tax rate of $1.45 because it is located in a city. So we've got $1.45 for the county rate and then $2 for the city rate, for a total of $3.45 per 100. So remember, what you're saying is you owe $3.45 per $100 worth of now this equalized value in this instance. So yet again, I'm going to take this per 100 rate and convert it to a per dollar rate. So 345 divided by 100 will convert this to a per dollar rate of 0.0345. So we owe 0.0345 cents per dollar now instead of per 100 times our $30,000 of equalization factor. And so that would be a tax bill, and it won't annual. So that'd be an annual tax bill of $1,035.